Darkest Dungeon, at the time of its announcement, fell into all the trends of that time that are possible. Look, this is an indie game that was very popular, it was collected on Kickstarter, was in early access on Steam for more than a year, is a roguelike and is obviously inspired by Lovecraft and the Dark Souls series, both gameplay and stylistically. But unlike many indie games of the time, which were forever stuck in alpha, the game did come out and turned out to be well tailored. Although, loving her is much more difficult than hating her. But first things first. Thank you for watching the RTV Gaming channel, and we are starting. Darkest Dungeon is a party dungeon crawler with RPG elements. A sort of mixture of Legend of Grimrock and XCOM. The first game took dungeons, here they are really randomly generated, and a set of 4 heroes who will go into them. And from the second, a huge roster of customizable characters and a hub location that also needs to be improved. The plot is also familiar. But because of the audio-visual content, it looks very cool. Our ancestor lived in abundance and depraved extravagance. Until he found out that ancient legends speak of a strange powerful force hidden under his estate. Then he hired workers to unearth the source of this power, and he himself retired to the mansion, to conduct terrible magical experiments. After some time, the workers discovered a majestic portal, which the narrator was able to open, freeing the evil lurking outside of our universe. Then it broke out and destroyed everyone except the ancestor, who managed to escape. He went up to the house, wrote a letter to the player, urging him to return and pull the family out of the abyss of dark horror. And he shot himself, unable to endure nightmares he saw. The narrator, even after death, will continue to comment on almost every step of the player. And his voice is simply divinely beautiful, it conveys the whole atmosphere of decadence and hopelessness. The whole game revolves directly around going to dungeons, and in order to be able to talk about the management of the roster and the city, it is necessary to analyze the gameplay in detail. So, we choose the area of the future campaign. Initially, there are 4 of them, plus the Darkest Dungeon itself and then 2 more from the add-on, but about them later. Each location is distinguished by a set of unique opponents and interactive objects. So, starting from this, you need to form a group of heroes who will go on a campaign and buy consumables that will be most useful in the current situation. For example, in the ruins, the main part of the opponents are skeletons of various types. Of course, bleeding doesn't work on them, so heroes who focus on it won't be able to use their potential. But the poison works fine, which is strange, of course, but acceptable. In the thicket of various kinds of animals, in the bay there are fishmen, with high protection against the same bleeding. And in the Darkest Dungeon, the source of otherworldly creatures, in general, is replete with Lovecraftian biomass with tentacles. Creepy. It is even more terrible when, after visiting the dungeon, filth begins to appear in Hamlet. You buy consumables for a hike, and tentacles and growths appear in the caretaker. It's really scary. So, the detachment is formed, the equipment is collected. You can go. The game will generate the dungeon randomly, so each campaign will be different from the previous ones. Here we have 2 important phases, the phase of moving and picking up loot, and the phase of combat with enemies. Combat consists of alternate turns between characters and opponents, depending on their speed. When everyone has used a skill, the second round begins and so on ad infinitum until someone wins. True, none of the abilities can be used outside of combat. Those heal or apply buffs after the battle is over will not work. From a logical point of view, this is strange, but from a design point of view it is understandable. Such a solution would make the game too easy. After all, let's say, first in battle you pour in all the damage that the heroes have. And after the fact you are already being treated and removing negative effects. And every battle starts from scratch. This is weird. And it contradicts the gradual aggravation of the situation. Therefore, our party has a second most important indicator besides health. This is stress. And if everything is clear with the first one, and XN works the same way as in any other game, then the second one should be considered in more detail. Almost every action you, as a player, has an impact on the stress bar. Even just moving through the dungeon gradually fills it up. Unsuccessful interaction with objects, some abilities of enemies and their critical hits, all this drives the heroes crazy. Lowering a parameter is much more difficult than restoring HP, for example. First, our crits. Each such hit slightly reduces the stress of the whole group. Plus some interactive objects and abilities of a pair of characters, a jester and a crusader, for example. Even on a long trip, you can make a halt, feed the heroes and cheer up, relieving stress. What happens if the scale is full? The hero will finally go crazy and get an additional random feature. Becomes either cowardly or selfish and so on. Such a character will sometimes not obey your commands and do what he himself wants. The masochist will refuse to heal, move relative to your squad formation, disrupting its composition, which is often very detrimental to effectiveness. In addition, now he will dismoral the entire team, increasing their stress. And if his gauge fills up again, he will get a heart attack, which will reduce his health to 0. In short, you really do not want someone to go crazy with you. This complicates an already difficult campaign, especially if your only healer gets underway. It's so cool when he misses his spells or even skips a turn, instead of healing the heroes in mortal agony. As I said, we collect the necessary equipment for the trip. Bandages, lockpicks, shovels and more. Torches are needed to light the way, because with a low level of illumination, the attacks of enemies will become stronger, and the characters will be much more stressed, although more loot can be collected. You also need to remember about food, because if you do not feed the squad in time, they will lose some of their physical and mental health. But many of these will help in combat. For example, healing herbs will remove debuffs, and bandages and antidote will help with bleeding and poison. Equipment can also be used for interactive objects. A chest with a lock can be opened with a master key, an obstacle can be dismantled with a shovel, and a statue can be cleaned with holy water to get a powerful buff. This management is a very important part of the game. After all, if you just forget to take a shovel with you, and the heroes will have to dismantle the blockage with their hands, having suffered serious losses in HP. But equipment costs a lot of money, and often you just have to throw it away to make room for money or gems, which are much more valuable than unused food or torches. The game will just sell consumables at the end of the mission for a penny, so it's better to take the minimum required amount, and not everything and more. Although, stress relief from fasting, for example, is also expensive, so it's an open discussion. In general, the main slogan of the game, and at the same time its main rule, is to try to get profit in the most difficult situation. Your heroes will die forever, missions will fail, and savings will be lost. Resource management is the most important aspect of the game. The life of the wards literally depends on how competently you manage the minimum of opportunities that you have. You are always limited by something. And it's very cool. Let's take a closer look directly at the characters we will manage. Available classes, if all add-ons are installed, 18 pieces. There are both classic knights and thieves, as well as rather exotic classes such as the occultist and the plague doctor. And the fact that each of them is unique is doubly true. Firstly, each class differs from the other in a set of skills, of which there are a fixed number of 7. You can use only half of them at the same time, with the exception of the geek, who has all of them available at once. Secondly, they differ in standard parameters: health, damage, accuracy, crit chance, defense, dodge and speed. What each of them does, I think, is clear. In addition, a set of resistances to various influences: poison, bleeding, disease, movement, debuffs and stun. It's about the difference between classes. But each individual character, even within the same specialization, can differ quite a lot, and it is precisely because of this that you appreciate some heroes more than others. Separately, I want to talk about complexity. It is really high, and the higher the shooting range of the campaign, the larger it is. If at the initial stage it is practically not important who to send on a mission, then the further, the more demanding the game is to the composition of the squad. A party without synergy is doomed to failure. And here it is necessary to mention the connection of the game with Dark Souls. Some references are hard to miss. First, graphics. Darkest Dungeon is drawn very beautifully, in the style of an authentic dark fantasy. The background of the location, the sprites of buildings, enemies and objects are beyond praise. Very good. Secondly, complexity. The community is so tired of casual that any difficult, but honest, this is important, the game is perceived simply with a bang. Even so far. Thirdly, the exactingness of resource management. In both DD and Ds, two things usually kill you, greed and arrogance. I can't count how many times greed and the thought, oh come on, I know how to play this game, set me up and forced me to quit tasks in order to save at least someone. The game has a class antiquary. He is extremely weak in combat, but always finds additional loot. And even more loot can be found if you go to the dungeon in complete darkness, without torches at all. These two things go well together, I thought. And he ruined so many heroes, just fear. But it's even more interesting. Even after 120 weeks in the game, I really want to return to it, because there is still so much to go through. And yet, a lot of popular custom skins are taken from The Witcher, which is logical given the popularity of the game, and from the Dark Souls series. There are two major additions to the game. The Color of Madness simply adds a new mode to the game, Endless Battle. You will fight without respite with constantly advancing enemies. And bosses, both new and already defeated. And when you finally lose, you will be rewarded with a lot of money and a new resource, meteorite fragments. You can use it to buy new strong decorations with unusual properties, as well as build unique buildings that improve consumables. The second, although chronologically the first, DLC is even more interesting. The Crimson Court add-on about vampires. Several types of new enemies, 5 bosses, new trinkets, a pair for each hero. And most importantly, epic campaigns. They differ in that their geometry is not randomly generated, but created by people. They are huge in size and you can retreat from them at any time without any penalties. And then return to the same place a week later, for example. Now, in addition, our heroes can get sick with a Crimson Curse, an analog of vampirism. It cannot be cured in the city, you need to kill the bosses. But if you give them blood, a new consumable, the damage of the heroes and resistances will increase. But only not for long, then they will need it again. In short, an exemplary addition that adds new aspects of complexity to the game. Darkest Dungeon is a great piece. If you enjoy answering the challenge the game offers and aren't intimidated by the turn-based gameplay, give it a try. Although, it's unlikely you haven't yet, in that case. Don't lose your head and relieve stress the right way. Thank you for watching the video and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new videos.